Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, December 6, 2017, and to hell with it all. Let's just not do this thing, and I'll take the day off. What do you say? Now, well, if we did that, then we wouldn't be able to hear from Joan McCarter and Greg Dworkin, our sustaining voices in all this. Thank God it's Wednesday on the Kagro in the Morning Show. Yes, that's the way I make it through the week, and I hope it's a boost for you, too. It's the only way I can make it to Friday when I get this kind of help from these guys and get our bearings once again, because, we're in for more doses of crazy. Plenty more to discover today. Lots to catch up on. New news. Let's see. I haven't noticed any rage tweeting this morning. I think they're keeping it down over at the White House. And I don't know exactly whether that's a plan or he's just grown bored with the presidency or he thinks things are going his way. I don't know. We'll check into what's actually happening, despite what the president says, just after this. Daily Co's Radio is live now. Kagro X, that's me. Hi. How you doing? David Waldman. I host the show. And I'll remind you that the ACA enrollment deadline is only 9 days away, or at least I'll let Bill remind me to remind you that is the case. The Affordable Care Act enrollment deadline, only 9 days away. Take 2 aspirin and sign up at healthcare.gov. It's easy to find. You know where to go. And, it hasn't been destroyed yet. It's still there. Use it. It'll piss Trump off. And that's well worth your time. Of course, Daily Kos, along with other activists around the country, very aggressive in their efforts to remind you that it does exist, that deals actually exist. You can actually do better and get better pricing despite all of the efforts at sabotaging it, in many cases because of all the efforts of sabotaging it. The Republicans not particularly good, as it turns out, in certainly terrible in doing anything affirmative and positive and helpful with legislation, but they're also incompetent in many cases at destroying things with legislation, unless, of course, you're talking about their own legislation. They happen to be pretty good about that. We, I think, prepared you very well for yesterday and the week to come in bringing you the early reports of just how the Republicans had screwed up the alternative minimum tax, the corporate alternative minimum tax, and that's becoming a big, big story. Lots more follow-up pieces out there today, much covering the same ground, of course, but now it's official. Politico says, yes, the tax plan is riddled with glitches, and I've got a piece that we can lean on and explore and see whether they highlight any new glitches that we weren't already aware of, but lots of people stumbling into the story about the alternative minimum tax. It's not something I discovered. It's just something, I don't know, I think we have an eye for that sort of stuff here. And say, ooh, a procedural story. I bet we can make this into something interesting. But thankfully, there are some eagle-eyed reporters out there who catch these things, plus just your regular basic online commentators. That's one of the great things that's grown out of the synthesis of the greater online world and the short news cycle of online journalism, bringing these stories to the fore. And it's just interesting to, I like when we catch wind of one of them early on and we find out that it's a story that has some legs. It wasn't like we found it in any obscure place. New York Magazine isn't any kind of journalistic or literary backwater, but it's fun to see these things catch on and come to life. So we'll explore some of that. Of course, Greg Dworkin has prepared a raft of stories for us, and I can see them already on Skype here, and I guess we anticipate momentarily having the music come blaring through, and we'll have Greg joining us. In the meantime, let's see. Other things that are catching a lot of attention. Brian Beutler, once again, making great deal of sense on Twitter this morning with a very interesting piece that he picked up on from CNN.com, and I imagine it'll become a big story, though it doesn't deserve to. I hope that his take on what might become a big story becomes the big story. And he lays it out this way by commenting on the CNN piece, a perfect illustration of how modern political journalism conventions short circuit when a political movement uses bad faith as a weapon. Can you guess what political movement he's talking about? The piece he has in mind here is this one here. CNN has headlined it as follows: Mueller attorney praised Yates as DOJ official. Email shows. Well, she was a pretty good DOJ official and deserved praise. In particular, deserved praise for what it was that she did at the time that, one, caused Trump to fire her, and two, caused other DOJ officials to say, you know, she's actually pretty good. But what a headline. Mueller attorney praised Yates as DOJ official. Okay, so what, right? Dave Shortell at CNN has an idea about why that might actually be important. And it is, but not in the sense that, well, I don't know whether Shortell really believes it in this sense, but certainly not in the sense that the activists working to undermine the Mueller investigation at any cost believe it to be. This, I think they believe, is their piling on top of recent word that one of the investigators working for Robert Mueller has been summarily dismissed in the wake of news that he at some point shared some negative views about Donald Trump in email and elsewhere online. And, well, you know, 50% plus of the country has some negative views about Donald Trump and probably shares them online and in real life as well. And you're going to have to deal with that fact. But obviously, the right-wing guys have in their mind the possibility of undermining the investigation by demonstrating what is bias in their minds. That is, if anybody ever comes to the conclusion that Donald Trump might not be good for the country and has done some things that are terribly wrong, that's bias, and therefore they can't possibly be engaged in the investigation of the question of exactly what it was he did, and whether or not any of it is criminal, and whether any of it warrants removal from office or some other punishment. That is, of course, an unrealistic standard. Brian does a great job in laying it out. We'll share his comments at some point today, and we might even be sharing it during Greg's segment. Greg's here. Good morning, Greg. How are you doing?
Hey, good morning. So
hi.
Did you, in that light, cover Sam Sater's firing?
Yesterday, we did discuss it. Actually, Scott Anderson brought that up. So why aren't we should be discussing this. And we spent some time on that yesterday. And, yeah, you know what? I mean, that's definitely
But
related.
it's all in the same thing. You know,
Right,
try to,
I think so.
Acorn, you know, it's try to get a little tiny thing and get everybody all outraged. And then the owners of the cable companies are upset about controversy and want to avoid it, except if it's on the alt-right, then they don't mind.
Yeah, that was kind of my upshot after reading through a couple of articles. That one, and then, of course, the targeting of Joyanne Reid as well, which comes from slightly, at least part of it comes from different quarters. I was interested in the dynamics of how it came out, how basically I don't think either case was made, but the brass at MSNBC was willing to accept it and take action when it was the alt-right crying about it, or any right-wing group or person crying about it, when there was left-leaning criticism. And again, I don't agree with it, and I don't think Reid ought to be removed from MSNBC's air, or anyone else's for that matter. But it was interesting to note that when the left was complaining, they didn't really take it seriously and haven't done anything. I don't want them to validate it by doing it now. But, you know, if there's legitimate criticism of a public figure from the left, MSNBC, the rest of the networks, you know, they just don't take it as seriously. But it's not that NBC is out of the habit of it. They just dealt with Matt Lauer. But, of course, the right wing thought they were taking out a liberal scalp there, which is kind of amazing. But
it is kind of amazing. So what did we talk about today in the pundit round? Today, we spent a lot of time on the Russia probe.
Oh, is there a Russia probe?
Also the case for impeachment.
Oh, yes. Really?
Because it's people are talking about it now. So
well, that's nice. Let's take a look.
Let's take a look. Let's start here. I have a piece from Colin Kahl, Kahl, from Foreign Policy. Okay, and it's one of the first ones in our long list that we sent you today. And I'll just scroll down and try to find it. And it's maybe right after the Pundit Roundup link itself.
Yeah, there we are.
The evidence is damning.
Damn.
What Team Trump knew and when. And a longish piece, but let me give you the good part here. While much remains unknown about the full extent and nature of the relationship between Team Trump and Russia's 2016 election activities, we actually know a great deal already. We know that Kremlin intermediaries reached out to Trump foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos and then to Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., in the spring of 2016. I would note for the record that's pre-election, offering dirt on Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton, including, in Papadopoulos' case, an offer of thousands of emails.
They love emails.
Turns out those emails were from WikiLeaks, and they were about the Podesta and DNC, not Hillary's missing 33,000, which is, I think, what they had in mind. But the article goes on to say, we know that several other senior Trump campaign officials were aware of these approaches, failed to report them to the FBI, and encouraged the outreach. We also know, in the summer of 2016, then-candidate Trump called on Russia to find Clinton's missing emails, and that several campaign surrogates, including Roger Stone and the Trump campaign's data firm Cambridge Analytica, and at least one prominent Republican operative, Peter W. Smith,
now dead,
who I believe is now deceased, reached out to WikiLeaks, who was laundering information from Moscow, and to Russian hackers to get additional dirt on Clinton. Yet, despite all of this knowledge of Moscow's meddling, candidate Trump repeatedly insisted the Russians were likely not the ones responsible for hacking Democratic National Committee emails or the account of Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta. Trump's denials continued throughout the presidential transition, and as president, Trump had consistently suggested he trusts Russian President Vladimir Putin's assurances that the Kremlin did not interfere in the U.S. election over the consensus judgment of America's intelligence agencies. So the author makes the point that even if that's all we know, that's pretty bad.
Okay, I'll agree.
There may be more, but that's pretty bad. Now, a further article a little bit further down, you can find it on your list because I block quoted it.
Okay.
Is called Flynn's Plea and the Significance of the Lying in the Russia Case. This is from Bob Bauer, and it's in Lawfare.
All right.
And goes through some of the various lies that specifically Mike Flynn told, and then asks the basic question about motive.
Yeah, we haven't gotten
and says
to that.
The question remains, why the lying? It seems that Flynn lies make sense if connected to the others told by Trump and others with Trump's knowledge about the Russian relationship over the course of the campaign and presidency. Trump's boasted periodically about the transformative potential of an improved diplomatic and strategic relationship with Russia. But at the same time, he's categorically rejected suggestions that the relationship was personally or politically beneficial to him.
Right.
Trump denied extensive business or financial ties to Russia and any political alliance built on mutual interest, which during the campaign included a shared animus toward Clinton and the objective of electing him in numerous instances. Trump's claims have foundered on the known facts. He and those acting under the direction have engaged in an extensive pattern of misleading and flatly false statements about the Russia relationship. One only has to recall the many interviews that Don Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner had with various Russian officials, including Jeff Sessions, who said, I didn't do it, or if I did it, I forgot about that one, or I forgot about those other ones. And there's extensive misleading with the whole bunch.
There's a
so it isn't
video
just
compilation circulating that makes
long,
the point
long
very well. Yeah.
Of course, one could conclude that Trump has misread his exposure on the Russia relationship and has lied to no purpose in the end, except to cause avoidable problems for himself. In other words, as some defenders of the president may argue, Bob Bauer writes, it looks worse than it is, and the president can't help making it look worse. He goes overboard and heaps falsehood on top of falsehood, even where the truth would be less harmful than the lies. So this defense is he didn't do anything wrong. It's just that Trump's a jerk, and so he kept putting his foot in his mouth. But when you get down to it, nothing happened.
Okay, that exists as a possibility in another universe.
Right. Or one could just as plausibly conclude that once Trump had, for all intents and purposes, made another of his deals, this time with a foreign government and for a benefit that was political, personal, or both, he felt compelled to embark on a program of lies and to enlist the full cooperation of his aides and associates. This is a deal he could not admit to have made. And the lying, especially the lying under his direction, and I come back to when he wrote himself on the plane an explanation of Don Jr.'s meeting with the Russian lawyer that the senior Trump dictated, which was a lie.
Right.
And the lying, especially the lying under his direction, may be best evidence so far on the public record that he thought he had a deal that had to remain denied, whatever the risk of lying. What very plausibly motivated the specific lies in the Flynn case was a need to deny specific private commitments to Russia that tend to support the appearance of and substantiate the affirmative case for what might be termed a special understanding with the Putin regime. You can call that collusion if you want.
Yes.
So that's, I think, a pretty good summary, and it puts the KT McFarland email about this will look bad for us. You could interpret it as, she's claiming.
Yes. Okay. Well, taking care of the washing machine is calling you.
Yes, she could be claiming that there's a collusion between them and Russia, or she could just be stating that that's how the Democrats would spin it, or that's how it would be perceived. But they're obviously quite sensitive about that, and Bob Bauer lays out the reasons why, in fact, that may be. So these are very compelling cases as to the idea that calling it a witch hunt is no longer operative, as Ron Ziegler liked to say. Because once Mike Flynn pleaded guilty, it's not a witch hunt, or at least they found a witch.
Yeah, right. Well, that's part of witch hunting is getting confessions.
Yeah.
So maybe
we shall see. Maybe. So we have all of that, and what's the background? Well, the other background stories is that NBC and others reported yesterday, Wall Street Journal, a whole bunch of other outlets. I have a tweet from Kendallanian, or Deadline White House, as Nicole Wallace had Kendallanian on. Mueller possibly looking at not just the Trump tax returns, but also the returns of all the limited liability companies, hundreds of them, that he's using in the web of financial transaction that he's involved with. This goes back to Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank has paid a fine for money laundering with the Russians. Deutsche Bank has been subpoenaed, according to these stories. It's interesting that the line from the White House, this is where you have to be a lawyer, and I'm not. The line from the White House is along the lines of the idea that Trump's data was subpoenaed is a false one, they claim.
I see.
But if what you're doing is subpoenaing the information on the limited liability companies and shell companies that were used to hide the fact that it's Trump's money that don't name him, then their statement can be true and Mueller's still doing what he's doing.
Yeah. Well.
So I hate to parse it, but I don't believe the White House's denials that nothing's going on here.
Well, I don't think very many people do believe that. But it's interesting for them to try, and I guess we're all old hat at watching it happen now. Nothing to see here; it's not happening, or whatever. I get caught in
and so what's the point of all that? It's the same thing now. The intellectual case for why Flynn might be lying is matched by the actual on-the-ground financial subpoena case as to what's the motive here. Why are you looking at this money? What business does Robert Mueller have of looking into this stuff when, in fact, he's supposed to be looking at collusion from Russia? What's dealing with Russia financially got to do with colluding from Russia? Oh, now that I say that out loud. Oh.
Yeah, it does sound worse when you say it all together like that, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? So, to me, I think what they're, again, just like Bob Bauer is trying to do, is establish motive. And so that's the whole idea of looking at this, and therefore, in that context, makes total sense.
Okay, I'm good with that.
So all of that came out yesterday. The other two stories, I guess there's three more stories. One is the ongoing saga of Roy Moore. New polls, some of them showing Moore has momentum, others showing that Jones has a tiny lead. Others on the ground showing that some Republicans don't feel comfortable voting for Moore. Others noting that you can vote Republican as a block and therefore don't have to name him. All of this going on at the same time. So we still don't know who's going to wind up winning in a week. But it's certainly possible Moore will win. And because the RNC and Trump have endorsed Moore, the pedophile idea that's what the P in the GOP stands for, is indelible. I mean, you can't separate it. I see people complaining on Twitter, it's not fair to call us the party of pedophiles. Well, you're not only endorsing him, you're sending $50,000 in monies to his campaign. So, yeah, he's yours.
Yeah. Well, yesterday's big news, as far as I'm concerned, with that stuff was the re-entry of the RNC in the race.
Which is a small amount, only 50,000 and no staff. But I get the feeling they did that to placate the boss, who in this case is Donald Trump. Now, Steve Bannon was there at a rally yesterday, railing about regular Republicans, and the person he attacked, it seemed to me, the most was Mitt Romney. Whose niece, I think, is the head of the RNC, who's sending the money down to Roy Moore, but let's not go into that too much.
That's right. I forgot about that.
But it was very interesting watching some of the reaction on Twitter yesterday to this from my conservative tweets and some of my conservative followers, who basically said that this is incredibly offensive. Here's one from a fellow Guardian rover, Mr. Smith, who I interact with off and on. For what it's worth, he says, ideologically speaking, I consider myself sort of a Romney Republican. So when people on the left defend Romney, defending Romney in the sense of defending him against Steve Bannon, it warms my heart and tribally makes me more willing to embrace Dems.
Okay.
Which is exactly what you need. You need people like Jeff Flake to say, I'm sending money to Doug Jones, the Democrat.
Right. Yes.
You need people to say, I'm voting for the Democrat, even though I'm a Republican and I will never vote for him again, and I hope he gets the seat so I can beat him next time because it's my seat. You need people to do that. In an election, you need people to cross parties and vote for your party because that's how you win. Now, you can also win by getting all of your own people or people who have never voted before to vote for you. That's all good. It's in parallel. It's not like either or. But that's the whole idea of working on the margins, as you and I have talked about on the show for a year, to try to get people like Mr. Smith to actually vote Democrat.
Yes. Well, I'm hopeful that that'll happen in droves at that. But yeah, it's hard to
it won't happen in droves. But if it happens 5-10%. The other thing that's interesting, and I have this in the pundit roundup at the very bottom, is Gallup tracking party identification. And actually, I'll just make it easy on you and give you the tweet right at the bottom here so you can see it for yourself.
Okay.
But what Gallup notes is that the identification of Democrats at 44% is pretty much a straight line since May of 2010.
Okay.
And Republicans, a few points less, is also a straight line until January of 2017, and they've gone from 42 to 37. The Democrats have gone from 44 to 44 in that spot, and the Republicans have gone to 42 to 37. They've lost 5 points. In other words, there are people who now say, I'm no longer a Republican. They call themselves independent. It's always the case that when you leave a party, you first become an independent. You might stay there, or you might move over to the other party eventually. But it lends credence to the whole idea that I've been pushing, that yes, the Republicans remain at 80% support or more, but it's a smaller group of Republicans. They have the same share of a smaller pie.
Yes.
There are less people.
I can see that.
So that's what happens, and that's who the Mr. Smiths of the world are in that 5% who have left the party. Radio Free Tom, who is an outspoken conservative, was musing all day yesterday on Twitter about should I leave the party given that they've endorsed Roy Moore, or is it better to stay with the party and pick up the wreckage? And this is a debate that a lot of conservatives are having, and of course we encourage that debate.
Well,
so
yes.
what are the polls are saying? Well, let me just give you this Borowitz headline before I move on, because I thought it was pretty good. Nazis feeling neglected after Republicans' embrace of child molesters. And it's a little satire piece. I don't usually read the actual piece. I just read the headlines. Okay. But with Borowitz. But in this case, he's just talking about, it seems like just last summer, President Trump was saying what fine people we were. Heinz Dorensen, an embittered Nazi from Mississippi, said. Now it seems like all he can think about is his precious child molesters. So he's obviously very annoyed. Maybe he's one of the group that doesn't feel like he's a Republican anymore.
Maybe. Well,
Gallup has another poll, though, I think maybe a little more important. Independents, Democrats not on board with the GOP tax plan. A majority of independents, 56%, join the 87% of Democrats in opposing the plan. 70% of Republicans approve the plan, 60% disapprove. 29% of Americans overall approve of the proposed tax changes. That, by the way, is historically unpopular.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, really. I mean, it's something we've known for a while about this particular tax bill, but I don't think anything that's happened in the last couple of days, even its passage in the Senate, is going to improve its popularity either.
Right, exactly. So you have that, and then you have the Quinnipiac poll that came out yesterday, an ugly Q poll for GOP. The GOP tax plan approval is 29% in that poll, so it's multiple polls showing it's not popular. Trump approval is at 35. Generic House poll is plus 14D. Wow. That's the important piece.
Okay, well, that is
similar for the Senate.
That's all right. Well, that is good news, and I'll take it. I can't take too much solace out of generic ballot stuff, but at least it's there. And
a year before the election, they're often very accurate. So take solace.
Well, all right. In that case, I will. Except I'll take it after the break. How about that? We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show. You're on Netroots Radio. We continue after our first break. Greg Dworkin's still with us and bringing us up to date on all this morning's headlines. What do we have next on tap?
Well, we're going to do, again, a little diving into polling here. Mm-hmm. Just in passing, I want to mention the Harvard poll, the Institute of Politics IOP Harvard poll of 18 to 29-year-olds. Shows that Trump approval is at 25%, down 12 points among Republicans since spring of 2017. Okay. So he's losing among Republican Ute. The Ute vote is going to the Democrats.
I'm sorry.
Trump is in the process of losing a generation.
Yes, and Ute. That movie was set in Alabama, wasn't it?
I suppose.
Yeah.
And then in the Q poll, my conservative friend Devin Siegfried points out, yet another poll shows GOP millennial problem. Only 15% have favorable view of the GOP. Also, Democrats are plus 40 with that group of who should control the House.
Okay, vote.
Yeah, so the thing is vote, but they did vote in Virginia. The idea that they won't vote is maybe a stereotype. We'll see whether it's true or not. We'll see if it's true in Alabama.
Yeah, true.
Will Jordan says the Republicans passed the Screw Voters and Lose 2018 Midterms Badly Act of 2017. And the TV news person says, big win for the Trump administration.
There was some debate about that right as the bill passed in the Senate. The next morning, there were lots of, I thought, pretty on-point critiques saying, look at the headlines, the immediate headlines. I know that people are rushed. Of course, the thing was passed at 2 a.m. People are pissed at having to be awake and working. But yeah, your basic large scale mainstream media outlet simply said, big win for Trump, big win for Republicans. Senate passes XYZ. And a few smaller and more sensible outlets really actually told you about what was in the bill and the process through which it was passed. And, even when it was pointed out to journalists, they still, I watched a lot of interaction on Twitter of people saying, you're really criticizing either the wrong people or they went to the excuse of I don't write the headlines or whatever. But yeah, still not really getting it and not really getting how people consume news. I think that's odd.
Right. So going back to Steve Dennis's summary of the ugly Q poll.
Right.
He points at, he says, holy gender gap, Batman.
Okay.
58 to 29 women want the Democrats to control the House. 45 to 42 men want Republicans.
Oh. Okay.
So the entire, and by the way, women vote more than men.
Good. Well, they only vote one time each. That's good.
Right. But, in the turnout, it's not 50-50. It's usually a little higher for the women. It can be a lot higher depending upon whether you're talking about a primary, special election, so on and so forth.
Okay.
But you're looking at this and watching that women want the Democrats to control the House. Now think Roy Moore and tell me how that gets better for Republicans. And the answer is it won't.
That must be why he doesn't want women to vote.
Yeah. And at the same time, of course, John Conyers resigned yesterday. He calls it retirement, right. But he's out. It is still unclear which Conyers is supposed to take his place, the son or the nephew. I'm not sure about that. There was an old, from the 60s, I'm old enough to remember this, there was a Von Metter album which was very popular until the assassination, which was called The First Family. It was a satiric look at what goes on in the White House behind closed doors. Okay. And there was a public service announcement. One of the tracks on the album was a public service announcement that said, it's important for you to vote. Remember to vote. Vote for the Kennedy of your choice, but vote. And, you look at this and say, well, okay, the important thing is you vote.
Right.
Vote for the Conyers that, you feel like is most entitled to the seat, but vote. Now, I don't know that that's going to wind up happening, but Conyers is out. Pressure is on Franken. The parties on the other side are not doing anything about Blake Farenthold.
No. And
Roy Moore. And so, don't tell me the parties are the same. They're not. Now, the time from pressure on Conyers when this was all first out to Conyers actually stepping down seems like a lifetime to those of us who are used to a 10-minute news cycle. But step back and look at the big picture, and it happened all rather quickly.
It did, in fact. Although,
particularly when you're looking at the mechanisms that don't exist to try to get somebody like Conyers out.
Yes, and that's another great topic for discussion. But I note for the record that the big news outlets again ended up running a stopwatch on how long we have stories. I know what the number is. I know that it took 72 or so hours for Nancy Pelosi to make a comment after the story broke because there were headlines that had timed her. Much less attention paid to the fact that, say, Donald Trump waited something like 3+ weeks before firing a guy that the Justice Department had told him is a spy within your own administration and a top-ranking job.
Right. So the time frame. And Pelosi made some missteps without question. She was very flat-footed when she was on Meet the Press, calling Conyers an icon, which he is, but not making clear until the next day or maybe the day after that even icons are subject to the same rules as everybody else.
Yes.
And if you are trying to be nice to him in public while putting pressure in private, which is what I presume she was doing, she did her job and got him out. And the other criticism I see of Nancy Pelosi, which I think is interesting but a little unwarranted, is why isn't she getting rid of Al Franken?
That's a tougher job for the House.
It really is. It's a tougher job for the House Minority Leader.
Yeah.
When it's a senator that you're talking about here. Why are you not criticizing Schumer? Why is it Pelosi?
That's a good question. But haven't the women been victimized enough in this?
Do you think her gender has something to do with that?
I've heard people say that.
Well, it might.
Men,
in any
so I
case,
believe them.
Franken is now in a more precarious position because of all of this.
And there's more stories yet.
And there's more stories. He's hanging on, but I don't know how long he's going to be able to do that. I think a lot of this now comes not just what kind of pressure there is in the Senate, but what kind of pressure there is back home in Minnesota.
Yeah.
If it's the line from the Republicans about Roy Moore, it's up to Alabama, then I'm not comfortable saying that, okay, well, it's up to the people in Minnesota about Al Franken. But the fact of the matter is that what happens back home really does matter. Moore is still here because the Republicans refused to denounce him in Alabama. And I don't think that Franken's getting that kind of support from Democrats in Minnesota. The parties are simply not the same. They are not symmetric.
Yeah. Well,
now I go back to this
people.
58 to 29 women want these to control the House and 45-42 men want ours. I would again remind our esteemed pundits and journalists, as well as, of course, our listeners, that women make up the majority of the Democratic Party. And you can't just ignore or finesse this particular statistic. I mean, finessemanship won't work here.
Finessemanship.
I just made that up.
That is a good one. I like it.
I love that one, but that's what it is. You can't do it. I mean,
of course,
you have to address this.
Finessemanship, naturally.
Yeah, you should adopt that word. It's really useful in a lot of different circumstances.
I should degender it, though. I don't know how I'm going to do that. Okay.
So the whole deal is that there's going to be continuing pressure on the Democratic Party, or as somebody put it, the difference between the parties is we take out our garbage.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable. I mean, I get the point, but yeah, thinking about the people involved.
You can't do this stuff.
Yeah. Well, right? You can't, and it makes you a bad
sorry,
person.
But in 2017, no quarter.
Yeah, it's
get used to it.
Yeah,
there's no excuses. You can't
voting for out.
It's unacceptable. You're out.
Yeah, I feel bad, but I feel
bad. You're out.
Yeah.
And I read all the different how Franken is different. You have to be nuanced about this, and this and that and everything else. You know what? I use a very simple standard. If the person we're talking about did what they did at my job, where I work,
okay,
would they be fired?
You're a normal person.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, so if Al Franken did what he did at my job,
he'd
be fired.
No, I can't.
He'd be fired.
Initially, there was
he wouldn't,
a question.
Too bad. You have 12 months to decide whether you want to retire. You're fired.
At this point,
period.
If it's all fake, they've done a fantastic job, and I feel uncomfortable defending them.
You're
so
fired.
You win. Yeah.
Right now, if you're CEO and do it, then you get $12 million golden parachute and fired.
True.
But you're still fired.
That does happen that way. We got a lot of issues.
We do.
And,
it's.
I got to read this newest
It may
story.
sound harsh, but I think that's, in my personal point of view, it's the only way to look at it. You either are defending the women and believing them, or you're not.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the Time, people, person, thing, issue, I don't know what, of the year cover is done. It's out. It's decided. Yep,
it is decided. It's the Me Too people. We have that on our list here. Times Person of the Year puts Trump not on the cover.
Yes, that's good.
But I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of his accusers is on the cover.
Well, damn well ought to be. I haven't really. I saw the cover fly by. I opened it to see exactly what it was. I think
it's
Taylor
called The Silence
Swift
Breakers,
is in there.
the voices that launched a movement.
And and actually, good point. Like actually putting Taylor Swift on there. Well, one, it sells magazines, but two, I had forgotten that she was an abused woman who spoke up, because it was in entertainment news for whatever reason. But she's got that story, and she won her case, and this was happening before a lot of the recent round. But of course, excellent acknowledgement of how long we've been at this problem, and basically for whose case the word sexual harassment was even invented. It's two words. Sexual was already out there. I think. But harassment was too. It was putting the two of them together like chocolate and peanut butter that made the two of them more meaningful. And that was not a part of the lexicon. And she made it part of the lexicon. And then we dropped. And then we dropped the ball. We dropped the ball right then and there. I mean, we did her a tremendous disservice. And I mean, that's just. I'm glad to see it because that's like the personal strength that it must have taken to persevere personally and professionally after that. And after having raised that issue, brought that issue to light for people men who had never acknowledged it even existed before and lose essentially. And then go on and not only watch Clarence Thomas go on to serve on the Supreme Court, but continue as a professional after that. Incredible strength. It's really rather amazing, and I don't think we've ever paused to really give it enough thought, at least here on the show.
And follow it up and hold our politicians to the same standard. Meanwhile, as we speak, here is a new tweet. Republican National Committee has transferred $170,000 to the Alabama Republican Party to bolster the Moore Senate campaign. Ben Sass tweets, this is a bad decision, a very sad day. I believe the women, and RNC previously did too. What's changed? Or is the party just indifferent? And then further tweets, if the political committee that I'm part of, the NRSC, decides to contribute here, and they haven't, and I don't think they will, I will no longer be a donor or fundraiser for it. And as I add, they haven't, I don't think he will. So I think it's a safe posture on his part.
Okay. Well, it's a good one nonetheless. He had
It's a good one nonetheless, I agree. Make it public.
Yeah. He didn't do quite as well yesterday, I think, in criticizing Jeff Flake. And saying, this is a bad donation, and Jeff Flake's tweet of his $100 check. I mean, I don't know why he stepped into it, but I guess he's looking to correct the record or bolster his position now, and good. I'm glad he did. I'm not voting for him anytime soon, and even if I move to a state, but hey, it's well worth it.
Do the right thing, and comment on it.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there's a Dem special election win yesterday, which is Georgia State Senate, and Democrats won. It breaks the GOP supermajority in Georgia.
Well,
that's important.
Yes. A lot of legislative wins around the country, or state legislature wins around the country that we tend not to pay as much attention to. And I don't know if we noted along the way how much difference that may make in the early warning that we got a few months ago about the number of states that had Republican control and Republican supermajorities, and that they might want to leverage that into constitutional amendments. Yeah, one less, and Virginia as well. Not that we've settled the question of who has the majority yet in the Virginia legislature, but we've eliminated a very large Republican majority, and of course we still control the governor's mansion there.
So this is the actual Steve Bannon quote from yesterday that's circling on Mitt Romney. Judge Roy Moore has more honor and integrity in that pinky finger than your entire family has in its whole DNA. And, of course, the entire family includes the niece who runs the RNC that just jumped back into the Alabama election to support Moore.
Yeah.
So go figure.
It doesn't make a great deal of sense, and neither did any of his criticism, really.
Yeah. And then, let's see, just as we speak right now, another woman says Franken tried to forcibly kiss her. This is 4 minutes ago from Politico. So I think Franken has to go.
Yeah. Is it the same? I have a slightly earlier story.
Probably. It could be the same.
I assume it's the same woman, but hey, I don't want to guess. And this one had a rather disturbing quote along. I'll discuss it later on, rather than take time on your segment about it. But it will be discussed. It did get reported.
And the last piece that I'll give you for today, actually, Mike Musson sent us. I have two. One is from Jason Sattler, LOL GOP, who just appeared in USA Today, following up on this whole millennial thing.
Oh.
Republican war and millennials look like a suicide mission, and he's talking about some of the polling that we were just referring to. And Mike Musson sent a great graphic from Slate Star Codex. It's at the very top of the list I sent this morning. And it's the GOP tax bill compared to other very expensive things. So as a standard, as a baseline, The 2017 GOP tax bill costs $100 billion a year.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's
Right?
a
For
lot
10
of
years,
billions.
it's $1 trillion.
Yeah.
Now, the 2001 Bush tax cut was $180 billion a year. So when Trump says this is the biggest, greatest, beautifulest, most golden tax cut ever, he's wrong.
Okay, well, that's funny.
Okay. And again, $100 billion a year. It would cost $267 billion a year to solve world hunger.
All right, but that
It would cost
worth it.
$1.4 trillion a year for U.S. universal health care. So this tax bill wouldn't pay for universal health care.
Okay, well,
It would pay
it would
10,
do a lot.
right? On the other hand, the Obama stimulus that everybody got all upset about on the Republican side was only $80 billion a year. And Bernie Sanders' free college plan only cost $47 billion a year. To end U.S. homelessness cost $23 billion a year. This is what you could do with that money if you didn't give it to corporations.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the
gonna do
Apollo program was $12 billion a year. You can go to the moon
yeah.
10 times.
Now, is that he did comment on it. I saw Mike's tweet here. Is that constant dollars? The Apollo program?
All costs are adjusted for inflation into 2017 dollars using the CPI inflation calculator. This is cost of government only.
Yeah. Well, that is pretty amazing. Although I guess I will say that buying the same technology now, I guess, and we would all think it was a huge ripoff now, is with like 8K computers.
Yeah, it's like replacing all the 8 tracks. How much would that cost?
Yeah. But that's pretty interesting. I imagine that an equivalent, like trying to do the Apollo program now, had we not done it before, I assume would be something on the order of
Right.
$100 to $200 billion a year, just because of the size of the computers we would put into it. It's amazing, really, that they did it with what they did it with, much less the money. But okay, wow.
And we haven't even mentioned the fact that Trump is planning on moving the Israeli capital to Jerusalem, in his view.
Yes, we haven't.
And blowing up the Middle East. And, what could go wrong?
I can't think of anything. I did see somebody put it pretty well the other day. Like one of the most unpopular presidents in history does this, moves the capital, or attempts to recognize as the capital Jerusalem. Like a week after tweeting out anti-Muslim, Muslim-phobic, Islamophobic videos from right-wing kooks. Yeah, I can't imagine why anybody would take any offense at it. I think it would probably inflame the place had you not done that. And most people probably assumed, in considering the issue over the years, that it would be, if it was going to be done, it would be done by a president who didn't tweet the equivalent of Ku Klux Klan videos about Muslims. But, this isn't normal, and
as I leave, I'll just remind you with one word, and it's not plastics, that we talked about a long, long, long time ago. And that word is chaos.
Yeah. He does seem to love it.
This is the chaos president. We told you that, and in fact, it's true.
Yeah.
He's a chaos agent.
I still really don't believe that he knows that how to create it, except he just, I like to do what I like to do. And that's it. Yeah, that's true. He's just
when in doubt and he doesn't know how to create chaos, all he has to do is listen to the political advice of Jared Kushner, because that always goes well.
That's true. Yeah, I mean,
fire Comey. Move this to Jerusalem. I mean, what could go wrong?
I don't know. You know what? That's an issue. I just never really thought it was going to happen, so I didn't pay a great deal of attention to it. I know it comes up from time to time. Is that something that the Israeli government wants?
They're being quiet about it. But it is impossible to believe that they don't want it. Because if they didn't want it, it wouldn't be happening.
I guess not. I mean, I imagine it's, but they're just.
When we say the Israeli government, you're talking about Bibi Netanyahu.
Yeah, and I mean, he is the Israeli government. That's the system that they've got.
And the ex-Republican is like ambassador to the United States, Ron Dermer.
Well, I imagine.
I mean,
that they always
how is
wanted
it possible that they wouldn't want this, whatever they say?
Yeah, I mean, but there's even a difference between wanting it and prevailing on the American government. You know what? This is a good idea. You should do it.
Yeah, there's a difference between wanting it and being a good idea.
Yeah, well, that's true too, and all by itself. Well, no surprise, I guess, that they might want something that's a bad idea. By the way, I think the thing to watch in all this,
especially if Jared Kushner suggested it.
Yes,
because he's got a track record,
and because it's Jared Kushner and Donald Trump, and not say, I don't know, pick your other right-wing ideologue who toes the line and mouths all the words about support for Israel and yada yada. The thing, to my mind, to watch is, did Donald Trump ever go through with the deal to buy land for an embassy in
I don't know.
Jerusalem?
Did he ever sue any of the people he said he was going to sue because they accused him of molesting them?
No, but those were money losers, and this is maybe a money maker. Good question. So if there's a Trump Jerusalem LLC out there, you should look at what their land holdings are.
Exactly. So with that, I will leave you. I think you got plenty of material to talk about if you so choose. But this is Greg Dworkin speaking with my good friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning. I'll be back tomorrow. And without the pundit roundup, we'll just see what's in the news, because it sounds like there's going to be a lot. If war starts in the Middle East, we'll be sure to cover it on the show.
Yes, at some point we will make mention of it. I mean, there's war in the Middle East right now, and we haven't mentioned it, but okay.
Yeah. I have to say, the funny thing is every time I see Middle East in tweets or online, I always misread it. And my first thought is Middle Earth. Right. Might
as well be.
Right. Donald Trump is moving the U.S. Embassy to the capital of Middle Earth. So like he's moved it to Mordor, no, that's not what's happening. I have to go back and reread this. There's war in Middle Earth. Well, of course there's war in Middle Earth. And they're always at war. That's the whole story.
Yes.
That's what's going on here.
Right. Starring Jeff Sessions as Smeagol.
Yeah, exactly right. So I think the whole thing fits.
Okay.
Anyway, take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you. I look forward to it, and I will use it as a crutch, as I always do. It's a hard week.
Yeah, I know, but have some breakfast while we talk.
Yes. Well, we're done.
Hey, speaking of which, how's Kagro World Headquarters remodeling going?
The remodeling, I would say, is now done. I think most of the cleanup work from you missed a spot here, and can you put some more grout there appears to be done. And we're now in the phase of our neighbors asking, so who was the contractor that was there in your driveway for like 2 months, and what did they do to your house?
Yeah, what'd they do anyway?
Right.
So where are you located? Did you move back upstairs?
Yes. Back upstairs, which was good timing, as they are out with the weed whackers downstairs this morning. But back upstairs.
I'll send Abby over to have a word with them.
Yes, okay. Well, I need somebody to chase them away, and I'll take any help I can get at this point.
Right, exactly right. Take care. Talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow. Yes, Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters has a new bathroom. It's very exciting and nice. And if you need a bath, have we got the room for you? That's what else can I tell you about it? Are we really going to talk about the bathroom? It's a very nice. We have a new shower. Okay, it's great. It's 25 years in the making, and so finally got done. It takes a while to save up for those sorts of things, and major undertaking to deal with contractors and all their work and all the disruption that comes with it. I count myself fortunate to have improved the look of the bathroom, and we got an increase of 25% in the floor space in the shower, so that's nice. Don't know really what any of you are going to be able to do with that, but be happy for me, and we'll leave it at that. Okay, so stories worthy of our attention this morning. Maybe I'll start working backwards through tabs I've opened but haven't embedded in Pocket yet, because they're the newest things. There's the Al Franken story. The one I opened was from The Hill, because I get a lot of news from them because I'm a sucker for packaging and for the use of photos on Twitter. They catch the eye, and I have to admit it works. And I see their stories, even if they post theirs second. I seem to see theirs first. Another woman says Franken tried to forcibly kiss her in 2006. This report by Rebecca Savransky. And I note that there's like a disturbing quote that goes along with it that I think really at this point will be just the straw that breaks this particular camel's back. A woman is accusing of Senator Al Franken of trying to forcibly kiss her in 2006. The woman, who was a former Democratic congressional aide, said the Minnesota Democrat attempted to forcibly kiss her in 2006 following a taping of his radio show. He wasn't yet in Congress, and that's kind of important, not as an excuse, but you'll see. It provides important context for that line that I think is going to cause a great deal of trouble for him and perhaps sink him. Anyway, the description goes like this. He was between me and the door. This was after taping the radio show. He was between me and the door, and he was coming at me to kiss me. And I don't know whether it was immediately obvious to her what kind of kiss this was going to be. Because, at the time and still today, people still do the polite, just sort of, half hug, kiss on the cheek, or even air kiss thing as a greeting and a farewell. And maybe we ought to stop doing that, but I don't know. Anyway, he was between me and the door, and he was coming at me to kiss me. It was very quick, and I think my brain had to work really hard to be like, wait, what is happening? But, and I guess you can see by where is this kiss being aimed? In that split second, you're like, this is coming straight down the center. I don't know that I recognize this as a legitimate kiss goodbye. But I knew whatever was happening was not right, and I ducked. And if you have to duck, that means the kiss is coming at the improper angle. Anyway, I was really startled by it, and I just sort of booked it towards the door. And he said, this is the killer part here. He said, "It's my right as an entertainer." And I'm sure he thought that was a joke, and it's kind of stomach churning, and we acknowledge that it's there, and we express our sadness and move on with the rest of the story just before taking our break. The allegation is from 2006, before Franken became a senator, when he was still an entertainer. It would not be your right as a senator. See, now he wouldn't be able to use that line if he were already in the Senate. He would. I mean, he's a smart guy. This is what bothers me. That it just doesn't seem to have any. Doesn't draw any line at intelligence. I thought that intelligent people, really truly in tune, intelligent people, wouldn't do this, and it's disturbing to find out that that's allegedly, at least, not the case. My right as an entertainer. That's all we need. I'm going to scan the rest of the story during this break and see if there's more we need to cover. I'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. A short break at the top of the hour just to sort of ponder what's happening in this report. And there's also a report, a write-up in it in Politico, and the Hills report notes it. So I guess that they were, again, probably second to the story on this. But anyway, Franken said in a statement to Politico that the allegation is categorically not true, and the idea that I would claim this is my right as an entertainer is preposterous. It is preposterous as a claim. The idea that you would claim it is, unfortunately, it's preposterous to me that anyone would claim it or even come up with the idea. Feeling down and sorry and ill about the whole thing, and I really would like to be able to cling to the idea that this is somehow all a strange right-wing conspiracy theory setup, but it's damn hard to stick by those guns. And I don't know whether we're going to make it to the stage of an ethics committee investigation to find out whether that's the case. I don't know whether, I don't really have any real reason to believe that an ethics committee investigation is the proper forum, or that they'll come up with anything that I would believe. And I'm very troubled by the idea that I would want to give the benefit of the doubt to somebody who, I'm troubled by the idea that it might be because he's a Democrat. And I don't know. I feel like I'm more troubled by it, or I'm more finding it more difficult to accept, because I just thought that Al Franken was just such a smart guy, and I'm so that much more disappointed. I don't know. Somehow, idiot politicians being sleazeballs it bothers me. Of course, any sleazeball bothers me. And of course, the abuse all by itself is reason to be furious. I don't know. I guess I'm astonished anew that it's, that this can happen among people who absolutely have got to know better. And I will say this, if somehow at some point in the future, after the price is paid and the seat is relinquished and elections are held and his career is finished, at some point I guess I'd still be interested to know, right? Okay, was this somehow manipulated or what? I gotta get to the truth here. If only to finally, once and for all, convince myself, you know what? It's such a pervasive problem that smart people do it too, and they probably do it thinking they're going to get away with it because they're smart. And it bothers me that that still happens. It does. It's just a double blow for me here on this one. So what can you say? There can't be this many stories, and it's important to note, as she said, she's a former Democratic congressional aide. I assume that's supposed to imply to us that she's still a Democrat, and I don't know. I got lots of questions, but only so that I can get some answers that finally nail it down for me, so I can let him go and let it go for myself. And a good reminder that, God damn it, apparently everybody does this. It's really amazing. All right. Well, there's more on the subject out there, or the wider subject of sexual harassment. And man, now I've got a whole bunch of disparate thoughts to try to collect in all of this stuff. The New York Times has what looks to be a gigantic piece, but maybe it's not all that gigantic. Although, yeah, as I scroll, a lot of it is pictures, but this time focus back on Harvey Weinstein, and I guess the Weinstein's complicity machine. Is that supposed to be the headline of this? This is on the New York Times sort of interactive section. So pull quotes from the piece keep appearing and disappearing on screen, so I can't, and in bigger type, and so I can't, is one of these the headlines? I can't tell, but it looks like the headline is Weinstein's complicity machine, which is an extraordinary field of inquiry all by itself, and I'd like to spend some time with that on my own, I guess, just sort of looking through this, because one of the aspects of the Weinstein story in particular that struck me was how complex this machine was, and how many moving parts it had, and how many people had to be in on it in order to make this work. And that's an interesting aspect all by itself. This piece, I imagine, is eye-opening and disturbing. There was a story the other day that I don't know if I put it aside or not. I mean, it was informative and well-written and made great points, which was it was offered up, as they said in the thing, and I bet I can find it this way, and if I didn't put it aside, as a taxonomy, they said, of the different types of sexual predators that women often will encounter on Capitol Hill. And that, I mean, it was sort of like disturbing that there could even be such a thing, like several categories. I mean, you imagine that there are going to be a lot of them. Here it is. A taxonomy of Capitol Hill predators. It was in the Atlantic, I guess. Yes, there it is. Michelle Cottle was the writer. It just came out. It was just yesterday. And there were a lot of people talking about it in the morning. And I was actually less interested in the taxonomy, although it is fascinating all by itself. The nuance, as it were, of Capitol Hill creeps and their methodologies. But what I really took away from it was right up at the top. In fact, I'll just give you the opening paragraph or two, and we won't even bother getting into the taxonomy. You can read it for yourself. It's worth reading, but just not here. right now. On Capitol Hill, as in other work environs, not all sexual misconduct is created equal. Some predators are more seductive than others. I'm not certain in what sense of the word it's used here, but moving on. Some are more aggressive, some let it all hang out, while others operate sub rosa. Some are chillingly systematic in their hunting. Some present and may actually fancy themselves as caring mentors, imparting valuable wisdom and nurturing close relationships with promising young up-and-comers. It's sort of disturbing all by itself in a different way. For women looking for help navigating this tricky terrain, Congress's existing processes are beyond worthless. This is the point that really struck me. More concerned with shielding the perps than aiding their targets. Regardless of age, rank, or party, Hill women are essentially left to their own devices when it comes to handling the wide assortment of men behaving badly. A particularly difficult feat in a culture of omerta that would impress Tony Soprano. Of course, omerta, the mafia's code of silence. But what really struck me about that paragraph in particular, and the fact that the processes are worthless and they're more concerned with shielding the perps, I wanted to sort of throw out at least this idea. One of the reasons I think that that's the case is so obviously self-interest and self-preservation, and the people who wrote the rules are, of course, members of this protected class, and they wrote the rules, no surprise, to protect themselves. But the excuse, I think, is gone now, and I think that's important, and we ought to zero in on it and see if there's something of value here that we can help undo some of this stuff. I think the assumption that they thought we would all accept was, well, we have to be careful, and we also, of course, we got to have due process, and that's the cover for different opportunities procedurally to keep things quiet, cover it up, make it go away, make it so obvious that the odds are so stacked against you that you just give up and leave. All of these things, none of which actually implicate due process. It's all about using a process to deny due process to the victims here. And I assume that the reason it was developed was, or the cover story for developing this, the reason it was developed is people want to get away with it. The cover story for a process that allows people to get away with it, I imagine, was something along the lines of, well, charges like this are so explosive and so potentially damaging. We're talking about representatives of the American people who exercise their sacred franchise to express their preference for who will represent them and the nation's Congress and yada yada and 7 years ago, Yankee Doodle Dandy and all the rest. Truth, justice, and the American way. Right. So, but they say, look, in other words, allegations like this can destroy a career in public service before you even begin to start an inquiry about getting to the bottom of the charges. And the allegations alone will kill you. Okay. That probably made sense at one time. But now I think it doesn't anymore. Even though I'm watching it in real time destroy people before there's any courtroom adjudication of any of this stuff, or even any near analog of it in congressional procedure. And I just was worried about a minute ago. Well, you know, are we right about Al Franken here, and what kind of process should we use to figure it out? And I want to figure it out because I need something to nail this down once and for all, so I can just say, okay, good, fine, we've done the right thing here. And I don't know why it took me so long, but it did, and it shouldn't. But, you know, the next case will also be different. And Republican or Democrat, you would have to wonder, okay, you know, at some point you get the idea that somebody will understand that they can manipulate this process. And that's always a worry, but it usually isn't the most valid worry in the first round of these kinds of stories. Anyway, here's the thing. Roy Moore hasn't been destroyed. He was complaining bitterly yesterday, oh, look what they've done to me. This is so unfair. What has anybody done to him, as I asked yesterday on Twitter. He's got the endorsement of his president. The Republican National Committee is back in his race. He's still running. There are people who still are willing to say, I will vote for him rather than a Democrat, and I don't care that he's a child molester. We need his vote for XYZ or whatever stupid priorities are. If you can do that, and he's not even the first one to do that. I mean, David Vitter made it through his thing. I'm sure there's other examples out there as well. I don't know if there's as many, if any, examples of coming through it as a Democrat in the modern political era, but certainly in olden days, that was the case. In other words, if you build a system to suppress these stories because they could be so damaging and you can't come back from an allegation like this, I guess we'll make an analogy to like temporary restraining orders. And so, if the damage is going to be irreparable, if irreparable harm is going to be caused by floating the allegations, you're going to want to have some kind of careful process built around it so that you can, make a real decision based on adjudicated facts. But one, we never really adjudicate the facts. Two, the process has really, lately anyway, been manipulated to the distinct disadvantage of the victims. And three, the alleged perpetrators seem, in most cases, to be able to survive just fine, even with the allegations floating out there. It doesn't help, and there's lots of call your office days, but, we're right now on the verge of electing an alleged child molester to the United States Senate over everyone's objection, including those of many Republicans. So that being the case, is there really a need anymore for, if there ever was one, a legitimate one, for a system that protects the perpetrators this way from the allegations being made? They're obviously survivable, so why not just throw the doors open already and let everybody make their allegations? And, if they're credible, they're credible. And we'll deal with it from there. I don't know. So I don't think I've moved the ball in terms of what to do. Certainly, I've not moved the ball at all in terms of what to do by way of preventing this thing from happening anymore. And I don't even know if I've moved the ball in terms of what to do once it does. But at the very least, I don't know. To me, it seemed like an important observation to say, there was once perhaps a legitimate argument being made about slowing down the process and keeping a lid on the process. But even then, when it was legitimate, all of that depended on then having a fair process for adjudicating the issues. And we never really had that. So the excuse has been illegitimate from the start. There has to be a trade-off. We can do things this way so long as there's a real opportunity to make, prove, and demand accountability for your allegations if proven true. And since that opportunity was never really afforded to anybody, the silence up front was always illegitimate. I guess we could at least take that away from this, if not convince people that maybe the delicacy with which we approach these things has always been misplaced, and we ought not to, afford these kinds of allegations any more, I don't know whether it's discretion or protection or what, than anything else for that matter. And maybe nothing deserves that kind of protection. No wrongdoing of any kind. If you got an allegation to make, you make it, and we'll work it out from there on. Anyway, the Ethics Committee isn't likely to be able to do all that much. The Ethics Committee might be an interesting forum if, I'm going to say some subsequent case. If they wanted to make an allegation that there really was some sort of bad faith set up I'd love to investigate something like that at some point and see whether it's really even a possibility. Because I have a feeling that the issue of where charges come from and whether they're legitimate is going to come up in the context of Trump-Russia very shortly. Yesterday, one of the developments in the Trump-Russia front was, I guess, what did Natalia Veselnitskaya testify before one of the investigative committees? Because the story circulating late in the evening or late afternoon was that she had essentially said that her claim now was that she was all about business in showing up at the Trump Tower meeting and wanted to discuss sanctions/adoptions, and that Donald Trump Jr. was all about his business, which was where's the dirt. And that serves the purpose of making Donald Trump look, more guilty. And so you might wonder, well, if the Russians are really trying to help Trump, why would they make Donald Trump Jr. look more guilty by bringing that up? And, part of the answer is they may not care, the Russians. The Russians may not give a crap one way or the other who looks bad at any given point here. It may be that they're not in it so much anymore or ever were in it for let's make Trump work. Let's make Trump look good. Let's have Trump win. They want Trump to win so that Hillary Clinton lost. They were anti-Clinton to begin with. And they might only be in passing pro-Trump because they could make some money with it. But so long as there's more chaos, and they're big chaos agents themselves, and maybe that's why they found such a great partner in Donald Trump, he would keep the chaos going without them having to do anything. But I don't think that they care at this point if they create problems for Trump or Trump's family. It's chaos either way. And if we believe their story and therefore think Donald Trump Jr. is more guilty and therefore Donald Trump Sr. more guilty, great. That's political chaos in the United States. And if we don't believe her story, great, fine, more chaos, because now we're never sure what to regard as truth or a confession or a true discovery about what actually happened, and more chaos ensues regardless. At some point, the Russians will find it, I think, more to their advantage to create doubt about everything, whether it's whether it towards some end or just in general. Making trouble will be part of their program. Okay. Well, I don't know. I'm getting confused, I think, about this as I try and connect too many disparate threads. I did see just moments ago Joan McCarter's tweet roll by with a link to Daily Kos's coverage of the Politico story I had brought up earlier, and it was her own piece, and I imagine this had taken a great deal of her time this morning, and we'll see whether she's able to come on for a few minutes and discuss it. But tax experts have finally had a chance to read the Republican bill, and holy crap appears to be their generalized response to it. So the Politico story I had open earlier on. In fact, Joan getting ready to come on. So why don't we save that and we'll discuss it. But as you know, alarm raised yesterday with regard to their screw up with the corporate alternative minimum tax. And I know that'll be at the heart of Politico's story this morning, and likely at the heart of Joan's story about the Politico story as well. Why guess at this point? Why don't we just ask Joan? Good morning, Joan.
Good morning. What a segue.
I tried. I want to get right to it, though there may also be other items on the agenda. But this clearly this consumed your morning, I assume.
Yes, it did. And actually, I spent a little less time on the substance than the political reporter with his, some say, This is just like when the Democrats did the Affordable Care Act.
That is an amazing claim, and I see it everywhere. And I did see somebody put together a really good timeline.
And in fact, that is in my post.
There we go. Okay.
Darn it.
It was pretty good.
No, it's not exactly the same.
Yeah, like by a year.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah.
Michael Linden is the timeline designer author, and I see his tweet embedded. It's very tiny print.
It's very tiny print. You can't really see it. In the story, there's a link to a Washington Post fact check.
Okay. And
that goes through the process that they went through for the Affordable Care Act, the 1,000 amendments that were considered, the 5 weeks of committee hearings just in the Senate alone.
Yes.
The hours and hours and hours and hours, 169 of them of floor debate.
Right. That's true, too.
And then, there's also the fact that it started out as a completely bipartisan process. Republicans were included in the process from the very beginning, to our detriment.
Yes.
Remember Max Baucus and his weeks and weeks and weeks of chasing after Olympia Snow and Chuck Grassley?
Yeah, I do remember that.
And every time it was Lucy with the football.
Yeah, although, we still try to kick that stupid football.
We still do.
But
and, in this one, they set it up under budget reconciliation so that they could completely shut Democrats out of the process.
Yeah, they did. And they kept, and then asking, where are the Democrats? Why won't they come to the table? You won't tell us where the table is, for one thing.
And yes, ACA was done under budget reconciliation, but because
partially, yes,
finally it had to be done because Republicans refused to play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, big differences between the two bills. But as to the part of the story that you were starting out with, this bill's a mess.
Not surprisingly, and a lot of people pointing out, with good reason, a rushed process or complaints about rushed process sometimes is dismissed as just, a last refuge of a minority that's losing. But the basic premise for going slow and being deliberate in the world's greatest deliberative body, by the way, is that you catch mistakes. There's a benefit to it for the majority too, but they were so, I think their big fear was not that we would find mistakes or that the public would find the mistakes. They would find the stuff they did on purpose.
Right.
And so they had to rush this thing through.
And they want to try to get this done in the next few weeks, just so all of the potential opposition doesn't have time to figure out what's in there and really ramp up opposition.
Right. So the unforeseen, it's foreseen by people who appreciate process for what it is. The unintended consequence, I suppose, is that they also didn't get a chance to review what was in the bill, including things that they thought they had written correctly the first time, and turns out that they didn't.
Like the AMT issue for corporations.
Right. Well, we got some time to discuss that one yesterday, and I think we laid the basics out. They thought they were going to be eliminating the alternative minimum tax for corporations, and then they decided not to. Because
they were giving money to Susan Collins and to Ron Johnson and Steve Daines to get their votes.
Yeah. So I guess in a backhanded way, you could say, oh, good, here's a small crumb of credit for you, Susan Collins. You screwed up this bill after all. And may end up giving yourself, by the way, a second crack at it, because now they're going to have to go to conference at a minimum.
Exactly.
To get this thing fixed.
Because otherwise, probably even with all of the horrible stuff in it, if that one problem, that AMT problem, hadn't been in there, the Senate could have convinced the House just to swallow it, pass it, let that be the law.
Yeah, and that would have been amazing when we found out other things. But
corporations are so unhappy with this AMT screw-up. They can't do that. They have to go to conference to fix this.
So that entails more voting and then more opportunity to prevail on people like, well, particularly Susan Collins, like all the information you got about the deficit reduction in this bill is wrong, and you're going to have a couple days to acknowledge that. Are you going to ignore it? You might. You're a Republican. but it's not her
Susan
usual
Collins
MO.
and Jeff Flake.
Yes,
Don't forget
okay.
Jeff Flake. They both came into this with the idea that they could pawn it off on Mitch McConnell. He made them these huge promises that he obviously could not make because Mitch McConnell is not in charge of either Democrats or House Republicans.
Right.
So they took at face value the promises they were getting from Mitch McConnell. For Flake, it was, oh, sure, we'll deal with DACA legislation. We'll deal with the Dreamers. We'll let you sit in the room while we talk about it, which was the stupidest excuse to vote for this bill that I think we had at all.
That is a pretty dumb one.
Now we'll come back to Susan Collins after the break.
Okay, yes. Well, we've got a couple seconds to wrap up, but yes, another unfortunately timed break. But yeah, pretty amazing, and we'll take up the specific issue of Collins afterwards, because there's an awful lot that she did wrong with this one. Okay, well, we'll be back after this short 2-minute break with more. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, continuing our discussion with Joan McCarter, our senior political writer at the Daily Kos. And we've been talking about the various screw-ups caused by both rushing the tax bill through the Congress and the other screw-ups, which just were simply a matter of Republicans not knowing what the hell they were doing, no matter how much time we gave them. And, of course, there's just the underlying disaster of the whole bill that if we had given them 100 years, they couldn't have designed it worse. This is the sort of thing they actually want to do in many cases. But they did want to make corporations happy by reducing their overall tax burden. And they not only didn't do that, it appears they may, in the end, have raised taxes on them accidentally.
Oops.
Yeah, so that's clearly going to get somebody's attention. Note for the record, again, that they intentionally raised taxes on individuals like you and me and all the listeners out there. That's not a problem. They're not going to revisit that. That's not why they're headed back to the drawing board. It's that the people that they meant to cut tax for, who aren't people at all but are corporations, my friend. Whoops, I actually gave you a giant tax hike. Yesterday the story was, I haven't lowered your taxes, but I've erased all the work you've been doing trying to take special deductions and ended up slapping you with a 20% AMT anyway. But I think there's actually some accidental tax increases that come as a result as well, although I don't know if I have a real grasp of all of that just yet. Maybe
I haven't got a real grasp on it yet either. There are some research and development breaks that seem to be gone.
Yeah. Whoops. So, okay, that's enough for, that's an angry master that'll get them back to the drawing board. And just before we left, we were considering the case of the various senators who appeared to be wrestling with how they would vote on these things. And Susan Collins, of course, among them. She must really be, I wonder what she's thinking. She came home to such a hero's welcome after the healthcare bill failure and finding it a little different, I guess, this time. A lot of outrage.
A little different. Yeah, that crowd was at the airport again.
Yeah.
But they all turned their backs to her when she got off the airplane.
And now, I hope that the news that's been breaking over the last couple of days has given her cause to understand this. I imagine she was just rejecting or ignoring the criticism at first, thinking I've done the right thing, and sometimes they're with me and sometimes they're against me. But any indication that it's sinking in with her that, for instance, A, she's not getting any of the concessions that she was supposedly promised, and B, that apparently she spent some time on the Sunday shows insisting that she had seen studies of the bill that had concluded that there was significant debt and deficit reduction in the bill, and in fact, no such study exists, and the people she cited say the opposite.
Right. She said economic growth produces more revenue, and that will help offset this tax cut and actually lower the debt, is what she told Chuck Todd on Meet the Press.
Okay, yeah.
Then he asked her, what? None of the studies we've seen have said that. She said conservative economists Glenn Hubbard, Larry Lindsay, and Douglas Holtz-Eakin had all said so.
Hmm.
And then Jennifer Rubin, who has apparently regained some of her mental faculties under the Trump administration, got in touch with two of the three economists, and they said, "Nuh-uh, we never said that." So she's been caught on a lie on national television. She's got an irate constituency at home. They're occupying her office, in fact.
Oof. Yes, okay.
In Bangor. And she is looking like either a liar or a fool. I mean, we already know she's a liar, but she's looking like a fool on top of that, because the things that she said McConnell promised her to do, she has the paper, she has the receipt.
Yeah.
We'll do the two bills that will help stabilize Obamacare, even though we do have studies saying that doing these two Obamacare things will not make up for the damage that repealing the individual mandate will create.
Okay.
That do that, and also, what was?
Oh,
she had things.
Yeah, I don't know them. I just knew that she wasn't going to get them. Yeah, after I heard, oh yeah, she's been promised it. Oh boy, okay. You know,
Yeah,
there's no point in studying what she thinks she's going to get here. That'll be a waste of time.
Was another thing, and I've been spending way too much time with Susan Collins.
Well, I'm deeply concerned by that. So,
but Paul Ryan, Medicare.
okay.
That they would offset the Medicare, the additional sequestration cuts that this will make to Medicare, meaning more cancer patients won't be getting treatment.
Yes, okay.
Paul Ryan yesterday said blithely he was not part of any of these negotiations. He was not part of any of these promises, and he sure as hell isn't going to do it.
You know what? I mean, I don't like Paul Ryan, and I don't like what he's doing, but he's right. I mean, he would say, you didn't ask
Mitch
me.
McConnell could not make any promises on behalf of
listen
the
to
House.
him. I mean,
he couldn't.
It's something he could have told her earlier.
And the problem, too, with all of these legislative fixes, one would happen in the continuing resolution to keep the government doors open, to keep government running. That has to happen by Friday, by the way.
That's another thing, yes.
And the other two are separate legislative packages. Or they could put it into the CR. But anyway, it also has to pass with 60 votes in the Senate.
Yes.
Now, you will probably get Democrats saying, okay, we've got to keep as much money in Medicare as we can, and we should try to stabilize Obamacare, but not necessarily. Because there's a lot of other stuff that's not going to be happening. So,
True.
Here's Collins giving McConnell her vote on these laughable promises that she's been around enough. She's not stupid. She had to know how much they were worth.
It would be surprising if she didn't. I saw a lot of theorizing because of that about, some of this would be perhaps she thought fixed in conference, or even people saying, well, she might have been promised this or that provision, and they might even have given it to her, and they'll remove that in conference later on just to bait her into voting for it. But she didn't get any of the things. Well, she did get a few concessions into this bill. Some property tax deductibility, I think.
Right, which raised the price, which meant they had to screw up the AMT.
Yeah, that's well, they're gonna have to fix some of this stuff, but maybe not all. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think anybody, right at the moment that she announced that she had these promises in hand, everybody rolled their eyes, and I think the White House actually laughed out loud at the idea that, or at least somebody was, off the record, don't identify me, but I'm laughing in Susan Collins' face. Okay. Well,
and it's not playing well back home.
No. Okay.
She came out on Monday and said her vote on the final package isn't guaranteed. But, as Susan Collins, she said that up until the last minute on this, too. But you could see where she was going.
Yeah.
At any rate, it does give us a wedge. It does give us time. It does give us some hope that we can destroy this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So keep fighting it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could turn it around, and they'd need a couple more votes. I don't think there's anybody still thinks that Murkowski is turnable. She just got too much and all that. But Flake, he's in a rough spot these days. He's not running again, and he's not really. He's already written his ticket home, I guess, but.
There's still the outside possibility of a Doug Jones in the Senate.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it's hard to see. It's now the 6th. That vote is in 6 days. They are aiming for December 18th, 6 days after that election, for getting this back to the floor. It's pretty darned unlikely in Alabama. Because it's Alabama. Although it could happen.
Yeah.
It could happen.
The hope I cling to is, like I originally said, it was the Alabamians that had to give him his convictions in the Klan cases. They didn't import a jury from out of state and ask them to sit. So they've done it before, and there's good people all over Alabama, and that's why the race is tight.
There could be good people who just decide that they are not going to go vote.
There could be. There was also a couple of issues, spotted over the last the home stretch of the race where traditional big base of support for the Democratic Party among black voters and black communities, and and we need to be very careful here to say, they're going to come out overwhelmingly. Those who come out will come out overwhelmingly and almost exclusively for Doug Jones, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But some serious issues, some serious complaints about, from voters who were being asked by journalists, they say, I don't really know anything about Doug Jones. There's some reason he hasn't made any inroads in my neck of the woods. Why might that be? And am I supposed to come out and save America again? But nobody's come to see me about that.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
And,
but
you got to be there.
Even if we have massive African-American turnout, we still are at such a registration disadvantage in Alabama. It's going to take some Republicans turning coat or not showing up.
Yes. Well, if you can do it, you'll be State of the Year in Time Magazine, Alabama.
Absolutely.
In my view, anyway. So, my hope's there. Some of my money is there. I want to see this happen. That would change a lot. I wonder what the reaction would be. And it might be really interesting. This isn't going to change the outcome of the vote, obviously, but it would be really interesting to watch, should Doug Jones find his way to the Senate, what Jeff Flake does in light of the fact that he, tweeted out the picture of his check of the contribution to Doug Jones, and for this bill to then come back up, and for all the deals to have fallen apart, and for all the analysis of it as a fiscally conservative bill to have fallen apart at last, and to have taken the slings and arrows of all his fellow Republicans, how does he vote on this one?
Yeah.
Still at heart, though. Yeah. And
we've got the House again saying the thing that matters most to him, getting the situation for the Dreamers taken care of immediately.
Yes.
They can put off until February or March.
Yeah.
Which they can't.
This is going to be interesting.
So,
I was going to say
and at the same time, this is crappy enough that some House members might just be changeable too.
Maybe.
We can't just focus all of our efforts on Flake and Collins. We've got to look at the House too. So if you're in a blue state and you have a Republican representative, get on the phone every single day.
Yes, that's true.
These guys
it's horrible
have got
for the whole
to
state.
be sweating it, because there's even more stuff put in here just to punish Democrats. And they admit it freely.
Yeah, they're not hiding it. I mean, it's the sort of thing. This is, part of the reason that they elected a person like Trump is that it's always sort of been a secret, and maybe not even so secret, fantasy of Republicans. Why can't we punish Democrats and single out the states where they win? Whereas, Democrats say it out of spite every once in a while, rank and file Democrats, you and I, and grassroots, why couldn't we? And then we quickly come to the realization, it's America. You can't do it. You can't punish people like that. It doesn't make any sense. The wrong targets will suffer, etc. And Republicans actually still say, to hell with it. We're going to feel good about this, even though
we're going to feel good.
We're
going to say it out loud that this is what we are doing.
Yeah. Like they're so enthused about being able to say
Stephen
Christmas.
Moore says it's death to Democrats.
Yeah, and he's happy about it.
Yeah.
That's just remarkable all by itself. But, well, yes, okay. So lots of pressure that needs to be poured on. And I was going to say, in the end with all this, even for Jeff Flake, is, he's a libertarian-leaning Republican, he says. And at the end of the day, it's a tax cut. Of course, the problem is we just found out at the end of the day when you read it, it's actually not. So maybe they can fix that. But what else is in there that's going to ruin the whole premise of this thing for people like Jeff Flake or maybe even Freedom Caucus
if
people?
Jeff Flake is taking his big principled stands against Donald Trump because he thinks he has a political future somewhere else, if he thinks maybe 2020 would work for him because he stood up against Trump, no.
Not if he goes along here.
That's
true. That's the only play left to him. Maybe
he's
a
he's
smart
young.
guy.
He must have some ambition somewhere. Maybe it's to be governor of Arizona. I don't know. But when Arizonans, if this bill passes and he helps and they start getting hurt by the tax bill, that's not going to work either.
Yeah. Well, other things on the table in need of some discussion. Of course, you mentioned the shutdown, right? So that looms for Friday. It's Wednesday.
That's Friday, yeah. And they've, of course, the Freedom Caucus has been exerting all of their pressure. They are united in getting concessions from Ryan. And the only way, of course, Ryan can get a government shutdown averted with just Republican votes is if he gets them on board, which, as usual, creates the problem in the Senate because you have to have 60 votes there because Democrats. Mm-hmm. So it's a new administration, but it's the same fight we've been having with the Freedom Caucus for years now.
Yeah. What's their, what are they rallying around this and what are they looking for?
They've been picking a big fight in particular over when this short term, because we're going to do another stopgap, very short term bill that will probably fund until December 22nd. Will be done this week by Friday because it has to be. They've been fighting for one that ends the end of December because that they think, and I'm not sure why they think, it gives them more leverage against Democrats. I don't know why.
So they want a longer one, like to the end of December. Is that right? Or
yeah.
Cause they usually, I think they used to be like all about shorter ones. Like we don't want this to, but now maybe they think.
I think what they're thinking is that this gives them more breathing room if they need it to get the tax bill through.
Okay. I was wondering whether they thought they might have more leverage if it were right up against Christmas and everyone would want to leave.
I don't understand their reasoning, but because they're maniacs. I don't know if they have reasoning, but this is what they're doing anyway.
Yeah.
What they're talking about as of this morning is a 2-week bill that includes a full year of spending for the Pentagon, but only for the Pentagon.
Okay.
And then the stuff that they need for the 2-week patch.
I see. So after the 2 weeks.
No. Okay. No, I got that wrong. This week, GOP leaders floated, this is a Politico story that came out just moments ago. They floated an olive branch to the far right, a promise that if they back a 2-week spending patch, leaders will fight for conservative principles on the second stopgap funding due in mid-December. During a conference committee Tuesday, lawmakers floated the idea of a spending bill that includes a full year of spending for the Pentagon, but only for the Pentagon. The rest of the domestic spending would be left in limbo as part of the stopgap bill, an outcome the Democrats have already vowed to oppose. Yeah, because, hey, CHIP.
Yes. You could throw that in there.
You could put that in there.
That's true.
Because in some states, Colorado, for one, they've already had to start notifying people that they need to be looking for alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
The letters go out on December 22nd, which is the day supposedly they're aiming for the next stopgap bill. Texas sends out their letters on December 22nd saying, hey, guess what? You're not going to have health care next year. Probably. Maybe you will. Maybe not. We're not sure.
So they could make that an inclusion in the first go-round. And I would laugh, I guess, if I watched the Freedom Caucus accept promises about we'll do something on a future bill. Yeah, definitely, right as we watch all the promises on the tax bill fall apart. But it sounds like you had it right, the first go-round, that the deal might be a 2 week. They'll do 2 weeks rather than 3, and that's really what they're talking about, the difference between 2 weeks and 3 weeks. They'll do 2 weeks if the Pentagon gets a year's worth of money so that the next bill at the end of December doesn't include any Pentagon spending because it's already taken care of for the year. And they can just focus on everything else.
Right.
Okay. Well, that's not an awful ask for people who care about that. But leaving the CHIP program out, that, tips their hand a little bit.
We're talking about $14 billion after they just passed this tax bill.
Right. Giving away $1.5 trillion and maybe more. They had to, I'd like them to check the math on that too, by the way. Now that they found so many mistakes, does the Joint Committee on Taxation
Who knows what
go
the math
back?
is on it?
Yeah,
I don't think that the CBO or the Joint Tax Commission have had any chance to figure out just how much this thing's
Although
gonna cost.
I guess the AMT mistake by itself pushes the needle in the opposite direction and actually lowers the hole, the size of the hole they're blowing in the deficit, and so I guess they'd still be within bounds for reconciliation instructions, unless there's some other mistake somewhere else that really destroys things and increases the cost beyond the $1.5 trillion.
They've got to lower the AMT.
Yeah. Well, they have to do that in order to get the thing to pass. So that'll definitely screw up the number. It'll be interesting just to see if there's a point of order out there, sustainable, that says, by the way, you gave yourselves the opportunity, you gave yourselves instructions to raise the debt by $1.5 trillion in this bill, and you couldn't even keep that as a lid on it. You blew a $2 trillion hole in the deficit, and now you're out of compliance with your reconciliation instructions, and you might be subject to a point of order, destroy the whole thing all over again. But I imagine they have to have their eye on that ball. But you mentioned also the CHIP program, and I know that there was some very odd, historical lessons being drawn about the CHIP program, and in particular, Orrin Hatch's Sunday comments, which I think just made everybody
there were
gasp.
comments last Thursday.
Thursday, not Sunday.
That I wrote on then, clipped the video, put it up, and it got picked up over the weekend.
There you are. Okay. So you did it. It's your
Steve
fault.
Bennett saw it, put it
Good
on
for
the
you.
Maddow blog.
Okay.
Then from the Maddow blog, or for Bennett, I don't know where Joe Scarborough saw it, but then Joe Scarborough tweeted it over the weekend, and it all blew up, and of course ended up being a stupid fight on Twitter where people were totally not getting the point.
Yeah. Oh, he's talking about other programs, or he could be, right? Was that not the excuse?
He was talking about the programs together. He was talking about the programs in context of this $1.5 trillion giveaway to the wealthy. He segued. He talked about his history with Chip. It was his bill. He did it in 1997, and then Ted Kennedy came along at the end and helped push it through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he likes Chip, but we can't afford it anymore because we're spending so much darn money on all of those lazy people who won't lift a finger to help themselves.
And he's talking about the tax cuts for the rich there, right? Those lazy people who won't lift a finger.
No.
Oh,
no,
his
as a matter of
idea
fact,
is
he's
that,
not.
he thinks there's other lazy people who won't lift a finger. Okay, I differ
We're
with him
getting
on
all
that.
of this help from the safety net. Who
Yeah.
The federal
Oh.
government is carrying along. All of those disabled people, all of... Yeah.
I see. And I had no idea that that you had started this whole thing.
I started this whole thing.
Good for you. Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's an excellent wrap up for this whole segment. Because I did see it kind of blow up over the weekend, and then I thought, oh, you say Thursday, eh? Okay. Oh well, you started it on Thursday. The Daily Coast really is like getting the newspaper early. You see these stories. Sometimes it's just a direct result of the good work that gets done there, and everybody recognizes it. And sometimes it takes a little whitewashing to get the likes of Joe Scarborough to acknowledge that this is an interesting thing. And I wonder, had he seen it on Daily Kos, whether he would have dismissed it. But
I'm sure he would have.
Yes.
But thank you, Steve Bannon, for picking it up.
Okay, by me. That's the way this stuff is supposed to work. We'll take it. Well,
And
pat yourself
it
on the
did
back,
end up
John.
going pretty much everywhere, which is good because finally people are talking about Chip.
Yes.
We even had the
60
New York
days into
Times
this.
yesterday with a big feature story on what this failing means. And, up until this weekend, we really had not been seeing people's hair on fire, besides a handful of us, over the fact that this funding has expired and that 9 million children are being held in limbo. Oh, and by the way, 25 million people who get their health care from community health centers, because that funding also lapsed at the same time.
Yeah. Well, amazing work. Just another example of how it can happen. And by the way, that means you kind of have to, you spend a lot of time pounding your head against the wall, Joan. And, you and a number of others were out there counting the days, but things weren't happening. And then all of a sudden the conditions were right because you hammered away at it for days, weeks. Week after week, counting the clock up, as it were. This clock was
67 days today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it wasn't getting through, and sometimes it needs to catch fire in the right place at the right time, and it doesn't happen unless you are persistent about it. You make a great point. You can make a great point once, twice, 3 times. There's a lot of people in the world. Sometimes you have to keep making that point. And when it's such a spectacularly horrible point,
it's such a popular
incumbent
program.
on you to keep working.
It is so relatively inexpensive. It is so important. And this is, by the way, for people who, it's for working parents, working families, or who gets CHIP help because they make too much to get Medicaid for the whole family. So this is filling that gap. These are working people. These are contributing people. These are tax-paying people.
Yes.
They aren't lazy bums who won't raise a finger to help themselves and expect to get everything from the federal government.
Yeah, and that, of course, largely
although some
being
of them
a myth.
might have granite countertops.
That's true. We are back. I did see somebody noting quite correctly. We're back in the phase of this game where it's politically important to Republicans to point out that poor people have things. And therefore, unless they're destitute and living in the street, they're not really poor. And then when they are destitute and living in the street, then you can ignore them because they're
lazy and we can't help them.
Right. Well, amazing situation. But great work. Pat yourself on the back. We'll all pat you too. But definitely
not until we
time.
get CHIP funding.
Yes, that's true. But the odds of it happening are increased immeasurably. They were safe in ignoring it for a long time until you took that away from them, and hopefully now it's exposed, and we'll see it change in the next 2 weeks or so as these CRs go forward. Thank you for explaining all of that. Thank you for doing all of that. Thank you for joining us today. And we'll be speaking to you again next week, and I hope I can help you out in between then and now with more of your spectacular coverage. Thanks, Joan. We'll talk to you again next week, and appreciate your work. Take care.
All righty.
All right.
Have a good week.
Thank you. You do the same. And time now for us to hand the microphone over to Justice to take you away, as Calgon used to do, for the rest of the day, picking up on all the stories that we haven't had a chance to tell you about just yet, and I'm not going to be able to cram any of those in, I don't think. We'll do what I can for you here. Let's see. We got Doug Jones turning on the heat, by the way, yesterday. You must have noticed that, against Roy Moore, and he had some spectacular lines and delivered them well.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
So I know you saw Doug Jones bashing Roy Moore on hurting little girls and how those kind of people belong in prison, not in the United States Senate. But Justice has also got a heads up for you on the next national monuments likely to come under attack. They're in Oregon, they're in Nevada. Be aware of it, listen to the show, clue in on it, and fight.